Hey there, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist of the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
I'm tired. How are you?
No, you're not.
I'm a little exhausted. You know why? Because we visited our first Comic-Con, our first comic convention in almost 3 years. Not quite 3 years, because we did go to Comic-Con in 2019, and we might have even gone to New York in 2019.
I don't know about anything in 2019.
I can't remember, but I know we didn't go to anything in 2020, and we didn't go to anything in 2021, and we this past weekend went to WonderCon, and I am tired.
3 days at an in-person comic convention is not without its stressors, especially during the re-emerging recovery phase of a pandemic. So I think it's okay to be tired.
What were your thoughts on WonderCon, your first one back, WonderCon's first one back in person? What did you think of this convention?
Let me just first say that I appreciated all of the different protocols and the ways in which we were kept safe, or at least the various practices and regulations that they implemented, ranging from the vaccination bans, the wristbands, the reminders to wear masks that they did on the con floor. Just lots of ways that I appreciated.
And they would literally walk up to people and ask them.
Yeah. No, I think they mitigated the spread of COVID and a potential new strain pretty responsibly. Much appreciated. We did a panel together, and I was a guest on another panel, on Tony Kim's panel, and the paneling was also just a delight. The staff were incredibly helpful. I guess we saw some familiar panel staff that have done our panel before, and that's always very nice.
Yeah.
Not as crowded, but that's a blessing. I don't know that I want to be around a ton of people. I just want a little bit of space right now.
Yeah. There was plenty of space. It wasn't like a normal WonderCon or Comic-Con where it's I wouldn't say WonderCon is ever like jam packed, but usually at the very least outside the convention center, it's usually jam packed full of like cosplayers and people taking photos outside in that little area by the fountain and all that stuff. None of that. I mean, there were people out there, but it wasn't, at no point in time did I ever feel unsafe. I never found myself thinking, if I'm going to get COVID, this is where I'm going to get it. Luckily, we tested a few days later, didn't get it. So they were actually pretty safe about their protocols there. So I enjoyed being at a convention again. I will say that I was a little disappointed that the big companies didn't return to WonderCon yet. They're not feeling like they need to be on a convention floor just yet. I understand it. I get it.
Again. Is there even any promise?
I hope not. Because this did feel like a much larger local convention.
Right. It had the cultural spirit of a local convention, which I like.
And that's what you're going to hear right now. You're going to hear our panel, the first one in person in 3 years at WonderCon, and that was the psychology of the Batman, with special guests, Londyn Jackson of History of the Batman, and Hector Navarro of Heroes Reforged and DC Daily. Drea, what were your thoughts on this panel? It flew. I'm not going to lie. It flew. But what were your thoughts on the overall panel?
It was such a delight to be able to have a live show. There's nothing like the aspect of the Q&A, the questions that we get at the end. You never know what you're going to get. The various responses, the laughter, the applause, the occasional disagreement that you hear in the audience, the cosplayers. I saw a ton of DC related cosplayers. There was an amazing Joker cosplayer in the room. So just
who disappears midway through
the
which
panel.
Creeped you out, and you'll hear that, listeners.
It's like you're just around your people. You're around folks that like the same thing that you like, and when you're mentioning Batman books and characters, and especially
you start to get that acknowledgement from the crowd.
Yeah. Like the psychology of these characters, it doesn't just come from one place. You're talking about this whole universe and all the different experiences and versions and background. So you know that many in the audience get it. And if they don't get it, they're learning about it.
Yeah, that's the stuff you don't get from the virtual panels. So I was grateful to WonderCon for coming back. By the way, you know what else I was grateful for while I was at WonderCon? Spent the entire time, guess what I was wearing? My MeUndies. It was a very, very comfortable weekend for me, and I'm not going to say that's how it always goes. It's hot here in Southern California. I was very happy to have my cool, comfortable MeUndies.
That is a perfect segue to our ad spot for the show.
Is it?
When it comes to the best movie series to binge, one particular franchise comes to mind. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, Star Wars was born. Something that was born not so long ago, MeUndies' newest Star Wars collab. MeUndies is back with more prints featuring your favorite characters from Star Wars. Get ready for your next movie marathon with the softest and comfiest Star Wars collection.
And they really are the softest and comfiest. And I'm not just saying that because they're our sponsor. Like I said, I was at WonderCon all weekend. Never regretted wearing the MeUndies that we had. We had the Batman MeUndies and those really sweet pants that we were talking about. I was wearing those when we weren't on the convention floor. They always made me feel good. And having looked at these Star Wars MeUndies, I can already tell there's going to be some that I'm ordering because I can already see they've got they've got this really great design that I never ever would have expected to see on underwear, but it's the Tatooine sand dunes with the stormtroopers there, like with the dewbacks and all that. And I was just like, those are amazing. I have to have a pair. So I'm very happy that I'm going to be ordering that pair actually right now.
I'd say that you like Star Wars quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
I don't know that there's a favorite Star Wars character that comes to mind for you. Like which Star Wars character would be your go-to?
Han Solo for sure, but as much as Han Solo, I'm really a Millennium Falcon guy, and I'm very happy to say that there's a pair that they have there.
Oh, really?
With the Millennium Falcon.
That's
and
awesome.
some TIE fighters on it. It's very space battle-y. I'm believe it or not, I'm going to pick up a pair of those as well. MeUndies loves partnering with your favorite shows and movies, and this isn't the first time they've created a collection with Star Wars. The Force is strong with this one, which is why they're back with 2 new limited edition prints, Lightspeed and Rebel Squadron. Match your favorite person in the galaxy, or go solo, in sustainably soft undies, socks, loungewear, dog hoodies, and more in sizes extra small to 4XL.
MeUndies has a great offer for our listeners. For any first-time purchasers, you get 15% off and undies shipped right to your door. To get 15% off your first order and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, go to MeUndies.com/Arkham. That's MeUndies.com/Arkham, ARKHAM.
Now let's get to this episode as we cover the Batman. Here is WonderCon 2022.
As folks are filing in, welcome! WonderCon 2022, right? Yeah! God, we have worked so hard to get to this point. Congratulations to everyone who is here at the convention. Is this the first convention for anyone else in person? Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, this is our first one in person in almost 3 years, and we cannot possibly be able to thank you enough for coming out and spending an hour with us talking about Batman and whether he's doing okay or not. We've got the right people to talk about it, though, that's for sure.
I mean, who's doing okay? Everything's relative, right? It's been a hard couple of years.
We're going to cover all of that and more. Welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Ward. I am the co-host of a podcast called The Arkham Sessions. We use pop culture to disseminate real-life mental health information. And all of that is done through the critical lens of a psychologist. I have that psychologist here with us. This is my co-host. She is the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we cover the MCU on our show, Dr. Drea Letamendi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
And she knows a thing or two about Gotham City, as she's even been written into canon as Barbara Gordon's therapist by Gail Simone. So, she might know her stuff. Also joining us are two very special guests from the history of the Batman. She is the Batman archivist. Please welcome Ms. Londyn Jackson. And then you know him from DC Daily, Heroes Reforged. Please welcome Mr. Hector Navarro. All right, we're going to start you out with a little softball question. What is wrong with Bruce Wayne? No, okay. I do want to ask, we are specifically going to be talking about the latest movie, Matt Reeves. I hope everyone has seen it. If you haven't, by the end of this hour, you're going to feel like you had. But don't worry, it's only 1 hour instead of the 3. But I want to ask, what makes this Batman different from the other incarnations we've seen so far? Hector, I'd like to start with you. Work our way down.
I don't have a degree in psychology. I'm just a fan. I think, first of all, thank you guys for inviting me to be on the panel.
Absolutely.
This is also my first convention in years, and this is awesome.
So glad you're here.
I'm so happy to see people, and walking around downstairs, it was sensory overload. I was like, what is this? So to answer your question, Brian, I think for the new film, The Batman, they're doing a lot in that movie, and I think that the thing that sets that Bruce Wayne apart from other versions of Bruce Wayne is, in a way, he's almost, for me, like almost younger and almost more year one than like the Christian Bale Batman was in Batman Begins. That almost feels like, the Christian Bale Batman almost feels like a more established kind of older Batman. Mm-hmm. Earlier in that film series, he only starts being Batman when he's like 29, turning 30. And the Matt Reeves take on Batman, I think, is he's still going through stuff and he's like emotionally more immature and unaware. Yeah. And I also think that the movie sort of tackles and lets that Bruce Wayne deal with some pop culture interrogation that Batman has come under over the past few, maybe especially like 10, 20 years. That famous question, why doesn't Bruce Wayne the billionaire use more of his money to help Gotham City? And that great meme, basically, it's turned into. And I think this Batman actually deals with some of that stuff, and has the politics of this film is very interesting, and specifically has different types of people with different backgrounds than we typically see in the Batman world, confronting him and calling him out and making him, like, kind of checking him and just, like, letting him know, like, hey, this is how the world works. You must be rich if you think it just boils down to choice and this kind of thing. So I think that's what this Robert Pattinson Batman brings to the table. Plus, he likes Nirvana, and that's never happened before. Batman has never canonically liked Nirvana or any music, I don't know, other than Prince. So it went from Prince to Nirvana, and that's where he is now.
Londyn, how about you? What do you think is different?
I agree with what Hector said. I believe that it's very heavy, like year one, year two. You can see those influences in Frank Miller's work and in even The Long Halloween, or even I think the big thing is that there's a lot of rage with this Batman, and it's very unhinged and kind of uncontrolled, and it's because Bruce is dealing still with figuring out who took his parents away from him when he was young, and I feel like that is a big part of why he just goes on the streets, and he just fights. There's no really rhyme or reason or like logic even in it. It's very just all over the place. And I think what I liked about seeing this Batman is because you saw Bruce Wayne a little bit in the film. I think he was mostly in the suit for like at least 85% of the film. You saw Batman, and then when you did see Batman, it was kind of like he wasn't really focused on the Bruce Wayne aspect of it. We weren't focused on him. We were focused on Batman. And even when you see that he doesn't go to, events, and the last time they saw him was at the funeral, and he just is kind of a recluse to the biggest extent of it. Because Christian Bale, even at the end of the trilogy, like in The Dark Knight Rises, when you didn't see him for 8 years, and then, and you haven't seen his Bruce Wayne, I feel like this one is even more just, I'm gonna hide in my tower, as Bruce Wayne. I'm not really gonna go out, and I'm just focusing on being Batman at night. I mean, even during the day when he would like be outside, he's like, oh, it's too bright, and he has to put sunglasses on because he just can't stand just being in the day. He's just so engrossed in being Batman. But I do think that we saw more of a young Batman, as you said, and kind of you really got to see him be year two. I think his rage kind of matched that Mike W. Barr story year two that came out in '87, where he has to work with Joe Chill to like fight the Reaper, and he was rage filled. He was trying to think if he should kill Joe Chill, and it just the kind of anger he has kind of pushed this Batman and kind of even engulfed like the Bruce Wayne. So I do think that this Bruce is still tackling his inner demons as he usually does. That's very normal. But I think because he's still dealing with his own family drama, and then of course with the Riddler, and finding out more about his father and his mother, and really learning about his family and learning horrible things, really, that Bruce is struggling. And I still feel like that Batman was a much bigger part of it than Bruce. But yeah, I think we saw a good year two, a young Bruce and a Batman, and Bruce still tackling his own family problems that add to why his Batman is so rage-filled.
Drea?
I feel like I'm just adding on to the statements that I absolutely agree with. I'd say that this is the first time I feel like most of us can be in the mind of the Batman, that previously there's this cloak, there's the mystery of who he is, especially when he's in the suit, definitely when he's Bruce Wayne. But this concept that, whether you liked it or not, there was this narration, there was this entryway into, like, the story you're going to get is the one that's in his head. This is from his perspective. And I think as a psychologist, that's particularly meaningful. You are getting the maybe not the most accurate, maybe not the most healthy, but at least a version of the story that you feel in a way is grounded, in a way is relatable. And I completely agree with the idea, like, we're seeing this version of Batman that is still quite vulnerable, still kind of working out his own, not just his concepts of who he is, but we can see that he's not fully actualized in his moral, dynamic, that he's still kind of building that sense of his moral groundings. And I liked that we saw him make clear mistakes, from jumping off a building and slamming into, what was that, the railway. There was a subtle moment where he uses his grapple hook at the top of the building where the bat signal is emitting, and he actually checks. He secures the grapple hook, and there's a subtlety of that move, and he checks it. What other Batman is doing that? Like, most of them are so self-assured and confident, and I think that this one is particularly relatable because of the vulnerability and the work that he's yet to do. And then I'll also, I think both the concept of, yes, nirvana, yes, the rage, this kind of sense of, deep emotional angst. I think a lot of us are there mentally. A lot of us can put ourselves there or understand that concept of really wanting to do better, to be better, and to feel frustrated, or at least not yet feeling that sense of satisfaction or readiness for being in the world. And I think that's something we can relate to.
And this is the first time we've ever, people have talked about the differences between this Batman and the others, and the fact that we're actually seeing a detective story, and whether you like his actual detective skills is one thing. He's definitely a young detective. He's not the world's greatest detective yet. He's even, I love the fact that he's got his journals. He's got his binder, like Project Gotham. This is still an experiment for him. So you really are seeing a very young Batman. And I want to ask Drea, because on our show, we typically have we've covered the entire Batman the Animated Series in order, so you get to actually see character arcs and how their psychology changes throughout the show. And one of the points that Drea has frequently made is that there's basically this triad. People have argued that who's the real Bruce? Is it Batman? Is it Bruce Wayne? Who's wearing the mask? And Drea actually has the point that there are three personas. There's a Batman, a Bruce Wayne, and then just Bruce. And I'm wondering if you saw that in this film, or is he not even yet formed those three different personalities?
I don't think he's formed those personalities, and let me be clear that when I say there's three personas, I don't mean he has dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder that he has. It's not Moon Knight, but it's a different panel. But I do think that because, looking at his childhood trauma, and it's quite fascinating, we don't really get his full perspective on what happened to him as a child. We simply know that his parents were murdered. And when something like that happens to us in our childhood, there is a high possibility that we start to kind of feel fragmented, that we create safe spaces in our own identities, or find ways to kind of compartmentalize our feelings and our thoughts and our behaviors. And so for, generally speaking, for there to be this Bruce Wayne public persona, this public image, this guy that is, kind of gruff and not really someone who lets people in, versus, you said Bruce, just Bruce, who is very featured in the animated series, someone who has some level of understanding of empathy and relationships and is willing to get close and still make some mistakes, but is that vulnerable person. And then, the Batman, who's this vigilante who is, as I've said before, kind of addicted to the adrenaline, like needs to be in that space of violence because that's how he addresses his difficult emotions. But to answer your question directly, in the Batman, I think that Londyn was getting to this too. There's this sense of like, he seems to be working out who he is as the Batman, but seems to be the most comfortable in the suit. There's something about the way he even has his posture, the way that he enters a room, the way he fulfills or just kind of takes space. And as Bruce, he and probably as Bruce Wayne, he seems like he's not quite actualized. And yet I think as Batman, he's the most integrated. He's looking at clues both in the suit and out of the suit, right? So he's kind of the Batman even when he's not in the suit, the way that his mind works. So I'd love to see where this goes, because I think that this is an opportunity to be less fragmented and kind of have one more integrated Batman version.
I got a question. Can you guys refresh my memory? Because you said you covered all of Batman the Animated Series. Mm-hmm. And I specifically remember a revelation in Batman Beyond, talking about the different identities that Bruce has, where when he has to fight the villain Spellbinder, who gets in old man Bruce's head, Spellbinder is using Bruce's voice to go, Bruce, Bruce, and he's messing with him, but Bruce knows he's not going crazy, and at the end of the episode, Terry McGinnis, the new Batman, asks him, how did you know that wasn't you, your inner voice? And he goes, because I don't call myself Bruce in my head. So Batman Beyond reveals that at some point in the DC animated universe, he just starts referring to himself as Batman. Then that's his sort of like standard main identity. Is any of that ever hinted at in Batman the Animated Series? Is that something does he just start making that switch like during the Justice League years? When does that happen?
Right.
He struggles. I think I don't think there's a moment where he says that, but I think we understand his struggle with integrating those identities And with the relationships that he has, realizing, I mean, he actually chooses Batman over other people, right?
Yeah.
I.e., doesn't follow through with relationships or disrupts relationships in order to maintain who the Batman is. So I think there's that pathway that probably ends up there.
By the way, it's taken a long time for Drea to come to the not conclusion. We're still going, but to come to terms with the fact that Bruce might not be just doing the best he can with what he's been given, because very early on in the podcast, it was no. This is he's fine, and then you start to see the wall come down a little bit.
I still would say he's right where he needs to be.
I want to ask a little bit about, because you guys were talking a little bit about sort of the violence, the rage, the vengeance. He's even called vengeance several times throughout the course of the film. It's interesting because he's not yet arrived at that moral compass yet, but doesn't want Catwoman to kill anyone. It's almost like, if I can't do it, no one can. But I want to ask about that and about her character. And this movie is very much about, without even being a movie that includes Two-Face, it's very much about a coin and two sides, and everyone is just one half of the coin. And I'm wondering about Catwoman versus Batman. What makes them different? Why is he not okay with watching that violence, that cycle of violence? Londyn, I would like to start with you.
It's interesting because while subtly he doesn't want Catwoman to kill or use a gun, and it kind of is a very subtle introduction of that moral code that's more modern now. When it was like the climax scene and he was fighting the Riddlers and he's just pummeling and she's looking at him like, dude, like relax, even though he doesn't want her to kill or things like that. So it's like they both have their own kind of issues dealing with controlling their anger and rage, especially, Selena dealing with Falcone and her family history with her mom and him being, her father and everything, and her trying to grapple with those revelations themselves. She's like, I'm just going to take it into my own hands and I'm just going to handle it. But in a way, she still is like, his rage is something, I don't know, almost like scary. She is, she's just, I'm just gonna kill or do whatever I need to do to get to my end game in Gotham, because Gotham is a dangerous place and you kind of have to be dangerous in order to survive here. So I think in that way they both see that, and she sees that even more, because even in the end, when she's going to Bloodhaven, which I was so excited to hear that. When she was going to Bloodhaven, she's like, you're going to die here. Like, you can't stay. You need to come with me, because Gotham is a trash place. It always will be, even no matter how much you try to change it, like, you can't. And so I think they both have their own violent tendencies, and I think they see that in one another, but I think it's the way that they harness that violence and use it. They both see negative things in the way that each other do it. And even though they're kind of the same, their personas are very similar in terms of just kind of being dark figures of the night prowlers. They relate in that way. But I think the way that they bring their own type of vengeance, whether it's personal or for Gotham, they both interpret it differently, and I think that is a big part of why they're different, but also how they're very much the same, and they were compatible characters, which is why I think they were so electric on film together.
Agreed. And it's interesting, you're talking about his not wanting her to use a gun, and yet in that scene, he is not only using the gun, but he's using it to literally beat them, and the guys, he'll use that rifle, he just won't pull the trigger.
Right.
It's like, it's almost like she would get her satisfaction the moment she kills, and he's getting his just by the process of the violence itself, of beating. Dre, I want to ask you a little bit. I mean, this almost reminds me of, was it the two-parter Robin's Reckoning, where we see Robin's backstory and Batman stops him from going out and killing the person who killed his parents. And I'm wondering what you're seeing in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like Robin's Reckoning, where Batman realizes that there is kind of a line that you can't come back from, right? Once you reach a point of violence, I think within his psychology, he believes once you kind of violate or get outside of the space of this moral code, you will never be able to heal from that. And there's something kind of a little bit unrealistic about that in a way, you know, a fixation or kind of a rigid way of thinking. You know, it's possible that maybe this finding reconciliation through violence, you know, I don't agree with it, but it may be something that she finds cathartic. Ultimately, there is this concept that as he's trying to create limits and sort of a healthy set of behaviors in her, this is like his way of kind of healing his own trauma. Mm-hmm. Like, I think we've established that there's more chaos in him than in her, and I think he wants to kind of like, you know, even protect her from having to be in that mindset and having that the effect of that. The other thing too, and I'm going to bring in The Long Halloween, which is both of the comic, a really great comic, and it was adapted into an animated film. And I kind of thought this was going to be similar to The Long Halloween, given that it started on Halloween. The concept of the mob families being actually much more destructive and harmful than necessarily the rogues or the villains that we're kind of fixated on because they're freaks or they're crazy or you know they're bizarre. And it turns out that for decades, the people that are the most destructive are these mob families that create generation after generation these huge traumas. So I think that's kind of where she is, right? She's trying to leave that lifestyle, and he knows that she could potentially be kind of taken in.
Hector, you mentioned the classic conundrum of what does Gotham City need? Do they need Batman or do they need Bruce Wayne? What do you think in this particular film? It's almost like the Wayne family name is maybe even as tarnished in Gotham City as even the Falcones or the Baronis. What do you think? What does Gotham really need?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think I'm not sure where this movie world is going to go because the Matt Reeves The Batman feels very much like a step one, and we've heard that Penguin's getting a show on HBO Max. We've heard that the GCPD show has now morphed into like Arkham Asylum, which I think is really interesting, that they're like, we don't want to do the cop show. Let's just do all the whatever Arkham is in this world. I'm still waiting for a Catwoman announcement, like either a movie or a show. Why haven't they given her one yet? I don't know. But like, if this is a step one, I think that question is really interesting, Brian, because it's like that's something they could pay off in the long run, where they could actually really take the time and show the impact that a Bruce Wayne billionaire could have in investing in public works or infrastructure or all this other stuff that we normally don't get to see because comics are cyclical and we're always stuck with Batman being active as Batman. Or, I've mentioned Batman Beyond. If we go into the far future, it's sad. It has to be like depressing and like, oh, Gotham is still really crappy. Like it didn't really work out. And rarely do these characters and these stories get to, and especially Batman, and it's really frustrating. And I think that if you're a comic book reader, you know the examples of Bruce Wayne's philanthropy. Mm-hmm. If you're a viewer of the animated shows that go on for years, you get examples of that, which are really great. My favorite is the Batman the Animated Series episode that flashes back to why Dick Grayson left, because Bruce was being too much of a dick.
Yeah.
He's Dick Grayson, but Dick Grayson left, and then he goes and he becomes Nightwing, and he describes this thing to Tim Drake, the new Robin, where he's like, we went to go find this guy who was working for, I can't even remember the villain, if it was Two-Face or Scarecrow or whatever, But they busted into his house and they beat the crap out of him. But then like
in front of his family.
His kid is there.
Yeah.
And that's where Dick Grayson goes, that's enough. And then at the end of the episode, Tim Drake or Dick Grayson or somebody like sees that same guy. He's been hired by Bruce Wayne and he's been given like a second lease on life. And he's like, oh, Mr. Wayne hired me and I've been having this great job and he's amazing. And it's like, we have not seen that kind of stuff in a live action Batman movie.
Yeah.
And so will this series, because to answer your question, we are always going to need Batman over Bruce Wayne. I'm sorry. He's just more dramatically interesting. They're never going to cancel a Batman book and go, now it's just the comic of Bruce Wayne. Like,
I want that comic.
Yes,
What?
that would be amazing, but it would be a limited
I
series.
know.
It would not be the status quo. It would just be like this fun exploration. Then he'd put the cowl back on because that's what we need. But what if there was a long-form live-action storytelling plan where like they could figure out that balance a little bit. In my mind, in my sort of headcanon, when Bruce Wayne starts, Gotham is so corrupt and so awful that he needs to be more active as Batman in the streets. And as the years, and as he takes down the crime families and, as it starts to get better and he starts to provide an example, the rest of Gotham City kind of gets better. You know what I mean? They vote for better public officials, like things start to get better. And in my headcanon, that's when Bruce Wayne pivots and goes, okay, now I'm on the Justice League. Now I can divert some of my funds to like, I built a satellite. Yeah, all my friends are space aliens and they have super speed and now we have bigger things to focus on because Gotham's kind of okay. But we've never really seen that in a movie because it always has to be sad when you go to Gotham because that's what Gotham is. So I don't know where they'll eventually go. And I'm really interested because it could go either way. The Batman 2 could make Gotham worse, or it could get better.
Yeah.
The Penguin show, whether it's a prequel, a sequel, a sidequel, whatever they want to do, it could show Gotham Underworld getting worse or actually getting better because of the impact of Batman. And we could see Robin being introduced. We could see Batgirl. We could see... He could have.
Or was Robin already introduced as the mayor's kid?
Batman
just couldn't stop staring at it in a real creepy way.
An orphan.
Almost predatory.
I must have him.
Or that kid that was part of that gang in the beginning of the movie who didn't want to beat up on the old guy and he kind of ran away. Bruce also stared him down. I've heard fans talking about that could be like Dick Grayson or Jason Todd or whatever. So I don't know. I think that for this particular movie, the tone is very bleak, and right at the end it gets hopeful. The tone is really, really like brooding and grim, but could this get into a more comic booky, hopeful, optimistic, superhero-y version of the character that like the Christopher Nolan movies kind of did here, but he was more like a tech guy and a different kind of character. It's really all up in the air, and at this point I'm just kind of, even as a comic book fan, I can't predict it. With other movie series, with Marvel movies especially, and this is not a knock on Marvel movies, I love them, I think they're great, but like knowing Marvel stuff, it's kind of easier to map out where they're going to go. When they first teased Thanos, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they're eventually going to do the snap. He's going to kill half of the... the comic book fan in me knows, that's what you do with that character. But with this, and with Matt Reeves' take, I can't pinpoint what is the best characters or character to bring in next. I don't know what villain they should do. I don't know how they should do the... people are like, I want to see Mr. Freeze. And I'm like, I don't know if that could even work.
Yeah.
It might just still be that uber realistic... Someone calls himself Mr. Freeze, but he just kills people by freezing them, but he has no affliction or whatever. No idea. I'm just along for the ride. I have no say, so we'll see what...
I know Dre's just curious about what music Bruce will be listening to.
For sure. I want the whole playlist because when I learned that Nirvana song is he's playing that in the movie, he turns it down, so there's more. There's a whole... playlist that he's got going.
Well, there is also the possibility, and Spotify did a whole advertising campaign over this, where he could just be playing that song over and over again. Some people do that. Some people do that, so we can't rule that out. He is unwell. Bruce could just be listening to Nirvana.
That's like the single piece of evidence we use to sort of like wrap the panel up.
He's quite obsessive, so that totally could be the only song.
Did you see his handwriting in that little notebook? I mean, that guy's, if he's not going to become a superhero, he's going to be becoming a serial killer.
I mean, let me just say this, since we're really getting into kind of his mind here, is that there is this obsessive quality to him. There's the journaling and the moment where he dramatically pushes the table, and then all of the pieces of evidence need to be on the floor, and everything's kind of organized in a way that represents what's happening in his mind, but isn't too dissimilar to some of the chaos in Riddler's apartment. There's an interesting comparison there. But what I did appreciate, just in terms of where his mind is that he's willing to be open to other people's interpretation or guidance around this detective work. So he's listening to Alfred talk about the cipher. He's relying on a cop to tell him about a tool that is eventually going to reveal a clue. A cop who has experience in his working class family needs to tell him what this tool does, right? So there's this element of needing to rely on other people's perspectives and interpretations in order to do a better job. And I think that's kind of interesting to harness here, is that he could be a great detective if his concept of being a detective is working with other people.
Well, that was the beauty of it, was the Batman we all know and love would have not just known what the tool was, he would have known from what factory it came.
Yeah.
He know like
the year it was manufactured.
He knows and what's interesting is the moment he finds out what the tool is, he then is able to find that next, well, we need to lift the carpet. So he is still doing it, and I appreciate that.
Guys, is this messed up? Is this why he needs Robin? Is it because he's like, Alfred, I need to hang out with a poor person. I can't solve this crime. Get me an orphan. I need to hang out with a poor person. And then Dick Grayson comes in and he goes, you never heard of a carpeting tool? It's a what does it say?
Dick's been in a traveling circus his whole life. He's never seen that carpeting tool.
Yeah.
He's never even seen carpet. He's
in
some sort of wooden wagon that's some caravan that's going down the highway. This panel wouldn't be complete, obviously, if we weren't talking about the Riddler at some point.
Yeah.
Right? You even talked a little bit about the fact that the two homes are very similar. Londyn, I'd like to ask you, what do you see as different about this Riddler from any other incarnation we have ever experienced?
Well, I just love the fact that he's a mixture of, asking complicated questions as like Jigsaw. It was very like horror. It reminded me of Saw. It just, the fact that he's still using the riddles and like clues and things like that, but it's to such a horror like genre, like the level of it, and it's so intense, and it's rather scary. But I kind of like that though, because usually when you see Riddler, I mean, sure, there's different interpretations in comics where like he's a little bit darker, but people see like, oh, he just leaves riddles and clues, and it's like a gimmicky type thing, just how the Riddler operates. But they kind of made him, well, I mean, he's like this scary serial killer who is really terrorizing Gotham and really succeeds in ruining Gotham. Like, I think that's the one thing I really thought was interesting about this early Batman in this movie, is that he fails at the end in saving Gotham. Like, of course, the end is about hope, and he is now going to try to represent that for the city, but the city's like underwater. The city is flooded, and it was just so chaotic, and he did not have a handle on stopping the Riddler at all. He didn't really figure out until it was too late about the bombs, and it just seemed that this Riddler was a good year 1, year 2 villain for Batman, because it really showed how Batman is flawed in his vigilantism right now, because he is a younger hero. But I thought that this Riddler, of course, was darker, and I think it challenged Batman, and it also kind of put a mirror up to Batman himself, looking at how Nashton grew up as an orphan, and how the Thomas Wayne and that family affected that, and just how he didn't have a family when he was young, just like Bruce. And I think they have parallels in the way that they grew up, and just how they're responding to that horrible childhood, or the tragic things that happen within their childhood. I mean, you can say that really with a lot of villains that Batman goes up against. You can compare Batman and whatever villain, say, oh, they both have their own issues, but Batman deals with it in trying to be a hero and protect the city, and then the villains deal with it in killing people or causing chaos to the city. So definitely, if you compare to like Jim Carrey's Riddler, it's vastly different. But I think it still had the foundation of him trying to challenge Batman's intellect, because Riddler's MO is always, I need to prove that I am the more intelligent being in this game with Batman and Gotham, and I want him to figure out my clues and my riddles, but I also want to see him fail as well to show that I am the more superior being. So I think while those common things that the Riddler has in comics and TV and film, this Riddler was definitely more dark, but it fit this particular Batman very well.
I got a question about the movie. If anybody knows the answer, did they hint at the fact that Nashton Riddler, when he was a kid, was the son of the reporter who exposed the Wayne secret? Because I remember when that whole sort of sequence was happening. Is that what were they hinting at it? Was it explicit? Because they revealed the reporter, and I was like, this is similar to the comic Batman Hush.
Yeah.
Because the guy's name was, I'm trying to remember the reporter's name, but I'm like, oh, that was Bruce Wayne's friend who was related to or is the Hush character, and then they brought in Riddler. So it's interesting because if they're hinting at like, this was my dad and then he was killed and then I was an orphan, it definitely, like you're saying, Londyn, like it holds up that mirror to Bruce Wayne the whole time. And typically Riddler, whether in comics or cartoons or whatever, his whole thing is like, well, I'm just going to rob banks. Like he's just in it to get money, like to be the kind of typical supervillain that plagues Gotham City. But this Riddler was like, well, I also want to expose the corruption. Yeah. And it's almost like, man, you got your heart in the right place. Yeah. You're killing people with rat traps and stuff, and that's wrong. But if you had just exposed them, this would be better. But okay, that's what I thought that they were, you know, that this Riddler still had that personal vendetta, kind of like Bruce does. Right. And then even by the end of the movie, Bruce Wayne realizes rather that it's better to be the superhero that's just sort of helping everybody instead of just trying to beat people up so that I'm getting revenge because my parents were killed and I'm mad. So, yeah.
Dre, I want to ask you, because part of your job is through threat assessment, and you're part of an actual team that deals with like violence prevention, and you do a lot of work with like social media, actually going in and looking at social media.
Yeah, we do. We look at some of these fringe sites, and by the way, if you're interested in becoming a psychologist, although it's not like being the Batman, you can work with the police department and advise them around profiling serial killers, extremist behavior. I wouldn't, the Riddler kind of falls into this category of someone who's in that, extremist violence profile, where he is, beginning to show signs of some really over-identified extreme beliefs. This is not a mental disorder. This is someone who's really fixated and obsessive about just like what Hector was saying, this need to reveal the corruption in the city, to dismantle it. But when people choose violence to do this, there's actually a pattern that we look at. And so when we see this in real life, there's a whole bunch of noise, right? And I'm not going to name them, but there's a lot of fringe groups online with sites. We know them by letters, we know them by names. And what's interesting is that when we look at these particular groups and individuals, he is showing a lot of these different features that give us the signal. So there's lots of noise, but then there's signals. And the signals, let me just name a couple of them. There's kind of a pathway to the end result, this goal, which is incredibly violent. So we'd call him an accelerationist, somebody who's trying to ramp up to that particularly violent event with violence, right? Along the line here, there's extremely violent acts that he takes. There's the fixation, particularly on the Batman. So he kind of co-opts the Batman's vengeance idea and really takes it to the extreme. This idea that like they're in this together, I thought was a cool part of the script, right? Like we think he's going to reveal that he's Bruce Wayne, but in fact he he seems to believe that the Batman and him have been doing this together. And again, I don't see that as a delusion. I don't see that as a mental disorder. I see that as him looking at particular signs and kind of becoming obsessed and fixated on that. And a fixation is not abnormal. All of us in this room have a fixation on something, right? We have fandoms. But when the fixation becomes so extreme and obsessive that you then are living your life this way and choosing this violent behavior, that's something to worry about. And then I promised a few more things. The last thing I'll say to note that I thought they did well with this movie is identification. So you'll notice that his followers online chose the glasses and the mask, and they found the jacket. And I don't know if there are other things, like maybe there were patches or identifiers. And you'll see this. This is why this is different than a lone gunman. So I saw a cosplayer who was doing a really great Joker. I'm a little scared that I can't find him anymore. Where is he? He walked away. But, that was more of a lone gunman story, right? This is somebody who is, building an army of other extremist folks who are really believing in this idea. And just like Hector's saying, there might be some truth in there. There might be something meaningful around the disenfranchised. That we feel frustrated. We feel like we don't have access to the resources. When we see so much corruption and people in power, we're going to take that down. And I think the last thing I'll say about this is that the potential blurriness between what the Batman is doing in vigilantism and trying to subvert the system, and what the Riddler is doing, which is, in a way, also trying to dismantle and distrust the institution that is inevitably corrupt and immoral and demoralizing. You see that, if there are two extremes, you kind of come around and meet at some point. And I think it's a really important message to hear, especially for those of us who again, look at the Riddler and believe we kind of feel sorry for him. We feel like there's something there. There's something harmful and painful there.
Yeah. I want to give folks an opportunity to ask questions. There's a mic here in the center. Which one of you is going to get there first? All right.
I'd like to pose an alternative to what you discussed, and this is for all of you. Relative to the Riddler showing I'm more intelligent than the Batman, I want to put a different take on that scene. And the take on that scene is, I know you're an extremist too, Batman. Here's the torch. You carry it. Goes right to what you're talking about coming around to the circle. I think the Riddler played that through in his head and expected the Batman to walk out on a mission. Mm-hmm. And when he didn't, that's why he went off. So I'd just like to pose that as an alternative for your thought process. Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah,
but then,
I agree.
I think that's possible.
Yeah, totally.
And then Batman literally does walk off with a torch, and now I'm starting to worry.
I wanted to follow up with what Dr. Letterman was saying about, more the criminal aspect of the Riddler and how his origin story kind of helps us to understand his criminal behaviors. So how would then you kind of use this Riddler specifically, not from animated series because it's different, his origin story and understanding that to rehabilitate him? What would be how would you go about that?
So the question is, how would we rehabilitate this particular Riddler? It's
Based
not
off of his origin story.
Yeah, you don't put him in Arkham Asylum next to the Joker. Probably the thing you would not do. You actually raise a really excellent point, which is the fact that how did we get here? Isolation, demoralization, feeling unseen, unheard. And I think all of us can relate to that. And I know there are some young people here today. I think, addressing mental health specifically and thinking about how we're asking each other for help, how we're identifying vulnerabilities and even just checking in with one another. Because I'm sort of answering your question by saying there may have been a point in his life where somebody would have changed his course. Mm-hmm. And at this time, it's not as if he can't get better, but it would take a lot of opportunities to find he has to identify with some other some other, belief or set of beliefs, and he really has to let go of this personal grievance. I don't think that happens in Gotham City. Maybe Bloodhaven, if that, but like, you got to go somewhere else. That's my best answer for now.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I wanted to ask about specifically in terms of the Gotham TV show that ran from like 2015 to like 2019. So we see like a young Bruce Wayne, like we start the series from his parents being shot, and then we see him interact with all the villains and like him growing up as Batman, and he goes and in the first season like tackles like him finding Joe Chill, and then like debating on like whether he should kill him or not, and he still has that like whole should I not kill or kill throughout the whole series. And then we see him in the end as Batman, but we don't see him as Batman. But like because of his upbringing, do you think that would have like had a different interpretation of like how he would be as Batman? Did you watch the show?
Can you repeat that last sentence one more time?
How would his upbringing of interacting with all the villains and like he went through like his, I guess, character development in a really early way, but he still was like struggling with a lot of stuff. How would that have changed how he was as Batman when he got older in terms of this universe?
That's a great question. I don't think that the writers of that show didn't even have to worry about that, because they're like, when the show's over, that's
like,
not,
that's it.
you know. I asked the same question when Smallville ended, because I grew up watching Smallville. It's the same thing, like Clark and Lex being friends, and to that degree, does that change the dynamic of a Superman versus Lex Luthor in the future? I mean, I hope that the future of the Bruce Wayne from the show Gotham takes that into account. Like, hey, Selina, we were running around in the streets when we were young. Because remind me, did they end up doing any of the Bruce Wayne travels around the world training in Gotham or no?
They did, but it was like off screen. And the thing was that they got canceled, so they only had 5 seasons and it was cut short.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
So
but they
I mean,
didn't have
yeah,
that.
I don't know. I think that would be interesting to explore that.
Yeah, thank you.
So we've talked a little bit about Robin today, and Robert Patterson has said if they do incorporate a Robin into the sequel, he said I'd like to do it right, and I'd like to have it be like a really young Robin and not an adult Robin. So I'd like to ask, like, what do you think would compel an adult male to have a little boy out with him fighting crime? Why would he think that's a good idea?
Training a child soldier.
Is he like trying to heal something that he doesn't feel like he can heal from, or is it like I'm leeching innocence off him because I'm not innocent, or what do you guys think?
I mean, usually, when you look at Robin, like, especially like the Dick Grayson character, and he relates to him because he lost his parents at a young age, and like he wants him to probably not only try to control that vengeful side of him wanting to, like, avenge his own parents' death, but yeah, I think that's why people thought that at the funeral, seeing, the little boy and he's an orphan now, they're like, hey, that's going to be the guy. But I think because they have that connection, if it was just Bruce and some random child that he didn't really have a reason why he's like, oh, I should help him get through what I know I went through. And even if it's in the way of being this costume hero, which probably isn't the healthiest thing to do with a little child dealing with these traumas too. But I think unless we have that kind of connection of Batman with someone who deals with the things that he dealt with when he was younger, I think it would be kind of difficult to kind of have a story around just him finding a young ward randomly. I think it has to be some type of connection.
I've thought about this a lot because it's like he's a serial adoptive father, but doesn't quite commit to the fatherhood piece as much as he could. But when I think about folks who work in foster care or have been in the foster care and child welfare work, I do believe there's a sense of wanting to kind of have that opportunity to work on our own recovery and our own kind of reconciliation with things based in our childhood. And if there's a possibility that someone can have a better life or better upbringing, and you have some part in that, I think that could be compelling for him. I think it goes deep. I think there's a lot of different reasons. I'll never forget a panel in Identity Crisis. It's maybe not the best book, but the art is fantastic. And I'll never forget that panel when it's it's Tim who loses his father to Boomerang, and just that whole panel with Batman just holding him and saying like, I got you, like I'll get you through this. That to me had a sense of empathy. Like, I understand what you're going through, and I think not a lot of people will. And from this level of connection and understanding, we're going to get through this. And I think that there's that uplifting piece that we're struggling to find with Batman is that potential in him.
Yeah. And by the way, we've posited before that Batman isn't even the best Batman. That it's very possible that Dick Grayson would be the ideal Batman because he's got the same trauma, but has seemed to have worked through it and is able to have personal connections and relationships, but then can also really do a great job out on the street, kicking butt when needed. But he also knows when to put it down. And so we've said like maybe Batman 2.0 as Dick Grayson would be the ideal Batman.
Healthiest.
You know, I'm being told we have time for one more question.
Thank you.
So sorry, Dr. Strange.
Thank you very much.
Can you give us more time?
I'll do my best. If we can build off of what Hector was pointing out earlier about how Bruce Wayne was able to use his strength of will to kind of combat this kind of a psychic attack, thinking of himself as this more powerful self. There's been examples in the animated series when he was in The Dreamscape by the Mad Hatter, using his knowledge of lucid dreaming to be able to tell that, okay, I can't read text in dreams, therefore I can move forward. So there's a few examples of potentially healthy skills or psychological approaches that Batman has, either colloquially or clinically, doctor to doctor. So what would you all say are some of the kind of useful skills that either from Batman or the other characters that you feel are useful for everybody's well-being that they can use themselves?
Well, I think first of all, for the movie The Batman, Robert Pattinson and Andy Serkis need to have a little bit more of a sit down and talk some stuff through. That moment where Alfred held his hand out and Bruce took it was beautiful. I would have loved to have heard Bruce go like, I love you, man. You're like my dad. I just want that. I just want Batman to say that. And he never says that. He never, in my mind, he doesn't call Alfred his dad enough. Like he doesn't call Dick or Jason or Tim his son enough. So
Bruce
I think
always just sort of treats Alfred like a butler.
I know.
Always. He's
know.
just his butler, and it's weird.
I know, unless it's that like Michael Caine, relationship, which they got a little bit more into, and I was really hoping that the Andy Serkis Alfred would kind of be more featured in this one. But again, going forward, it's like where are they going to go with that relationship is really interesting. So my number one thing would be like, I was going to say, Robert, Bruce, take out the Nirvana, sit down, go talk to Alfred, just talk it out. Just talk it out. That's helpful.
I mean, we talk about this on our show a lot because, we believe that there's something really meaningful and helpful about following these stories. And I mean these stories like in all of the comic book narratives, we're talking about Batman today, but what can we grasp from this that can be uplifting and helpful and get us through our emotional times, our difficult times emotionally? And I think we've often come back to his sense of identity, his sense of purpose, and his sense of connections to others. So those are sets of skills, right? That self-actualization, self-awareness, who am I, and how do I present myself to other people? That sense of purpose. Why am I even here? What am I doing? Does this matter? Which I think all of us are working on in our lifetime. And then that third piece is how do I relate to others and really establish connecting meaningful relationships to other people to get through hard times. And so he's not the best at all these things, but he's constantly working through one of these areas, and we can comment on it, correct it, even notice where he does do well here, and really harness that to talk about these social and emotional skills in a way that we hope our listeners can gain from.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. I think our panelists. And Hector, why don't we start with you? Why don't you let them know where they can find you online?
You can go to youtube.com/heroesreforged to see me and my two friends talk about this kind of stuff. Not nearly as smart, but still fun.
Londyn?
You can find me on Instagram, which is at History of the Batman, and also on YouTube. I just talk about the Dark Knight and his 83-year mythology, and it's a good time. So become a Gothamite and check it out.
You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, and on socials at Arkham Asylum Doc. I just want to say also, please stay for the next panel, Gay Geeks, if you're able to. It's a fantastic panel with amazing guests. Please stay for that if you can. And then thanks to our moderator, Brian Ward, for having this conversation. It's really great to have you.
Just ask the questions. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful WonderCon 2022.